Hi, I'm C.Carmichael, and I'm going to tell you about a resource that I'll be helping to design for orienting volunteers for CCE, the non-formal education organization that I work for. Each year, CCE works with over 45,000 volunteers in local learning centers across the state. And while there's a statewide policy that requires local onboarding of volunteers, there's not statewide instructional resources, and in many cases, there's not the local staff time available to host orientation. So it's really hard to do what this policy sets out to do. These factors combine to suggest that maybe there's a need for an organizational approach, doing something a little bit different. The intent of this policy is to help orient all volunteers to the mission, vision, and values of the organization, and also to help them know common practices to keep everyone safe. So it's important stuff. In preparing for this project, I reviewed literature and research, had some discussions with other staff, and reviewed how other national organizations onboard volunteers. All of these things pointed to creating a resource that would be a central onboarding spot for potential volunteers, and that resource sort of felt like it would look like and feel like a website. What you see here is a prototype that's based on the CCE public site and the content found on the American Red Cross volunteer page, a good example of intentional online learning design. We'll talk more about the prototype in a minute, but first let's take a look at the prime audience for this resource, potential volunteers. Research about volunteers indicates that most adults volunteer for a specific reason, and that their experiences as a volunteer help them decide whether to or not to continue volunteering with an organization. That information felt like it was very relevant in thinking through what this resource would look like and feel like. Research about volunteer motivations correlates well with what we know about adult learning theory. We want to give the learners as much control as possible in their learning and ensure that what's offered is not only meets our agenda, but it also is relevant to them. The goal of this resource is to build an experience that meets the requirements outlined in the volunteer policy. Additionally, because we know the relationship building is of interest to the volunteers and it's helpful for our staff, volunteers need to feel warmly welcomed and connected even in a digital environment, even in the very beginning stages. So we're going to take a look next at the profile of a potential volunteer. So this is Courtney and her daughter Emma. Emma's a high school freshman interested in going to vet school. Courtney's interested in getting Emma involved in 4-H because she knows that 4-H has a connection to Cornell University. And Cornell University is where Emma wants to go to school. So Courtney is completing the volunteer onboarding process because she would like to become a volunteer and encourage her daughter to get involved. Courtney finds the Volunteer with Us link in a simple Google search. So let's take a look at what, if we were to map out this process, what it might look like. Courtney finds the Volunteer with Us link with a simple Google search. She completes the form asking for basic contact information. She sees pictures that feel fresh and relevant, and she feels intrigued and excited about this opportunity. She completes the 6 modules in 6 or fewer settings of a half an hour each, which feels reasonable, and she appreciates that all of the elements can be started and stopped and repeated at any time. She likes that because this is all new to her and her schedule is frequently interrupted. As requested in a module, Courtney emails a local staff member introducing herself, and she then receives a quick response back from the staff person and feels welcome and confident about being involved with Cornell Cooperative Extension. When Courtney completes the full orientation, she receives an online certificate, and the staff receives confirmation, and then they schedule a meeting with Courtney to proceed. The onboarding process for the CCE Volunteers Project uses a number of multimedia principles to manage cognitive load for potential volunteers. The intent is not to discourage or frustrate the learners by a complicated process or any lack of clarity. So let's take a look at some of the proposed pages. While the potential volunteer will eventually be asked to complete a more thorough application, the initial intake page applies the coherence principle. It has very few questions and simple instructions so as to minimize extraneous load. The signaling principle is demonstrated on the Learning homepage, indicating clearly where the potential volunteer is in the process. The learner control principle is at play in all of the video content, giving the learner the opportunity to start, pause, play, and replay content. Additionally, the introduction to CCE will have segmented content about major topical areas. The learner can choose which topic to watch first, last, etc., so they get to make some choices. And because not all the content will be relevant to each potential volunteer, some of the content will provide for learner-centered choices. So you can see here, there's important programs led by volunteers listed here, and the directions are to watch 2 of the following. The personalization principle is applied throughout with casual language and a warm tone, helping the potential volunteer to feel welcome. And there's also opportunities where the learner will find information personal to their interests and location. Evaluation will be based on intended outcomes and will include practices like concept checks, simulations, completion recognition, and interactions with local staff. So many resources were reviewed for the development of this project, but those highlighted in this presentation are listed here and accessible through a quick Google search. Thank you so much for listening.